You guys can... Sorry, everybody today just wants to freaking rev their engine. Dude, Domino's guy, where do you have to go? Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This book, I haven't read this book in 7 years. And the last time I read it, I had to go on pretty much like a hiatus of reading books because I was just very, very emotional. I also was just getting into literature, so reading about the Hunger Games was the greatest for my mental state at the time. I reread this. I mentally blocked out scenes from this book particular. We are still with Katniss. She's in District 13. Most of the book is just her kind of like refiguring out who she is as a person, just agreeing with these higher officials to try and win a war for the most part. And you're told this right off the bat. This is why 13 still exists. They need her as the Mockingjay symbol for the war. And she pretty much just goes along with Plutarch and this other woman who's in power, who is named President Coin. And so pretty much they're just using her for the most part, and then they try to get people out from the capital to help and whatnot. So the whole entire time I was just really kind of like salty towards the fact that all of the people that have died so far within the series, I feel like they didn't just like get justice at all. Because like they're mentioned like, oh, so-and-so died. Here's a great example. Cinna. That Cinna died in the second book. And when I first read that, I thought in my head, no, he's not dead. He's not dead. It's fine. It's fine. It's whatever. You know, he's not dead. In my head, I'm like, no, he can't be dead, you know? And then later on, we find out that, oh yeah, they say that he probably just died during an interrogation. And then Katniss doesn't bring it up again. It's kind of just like, whatever. She does mention him every now and then because he did create her costumes for being the Mockingjay. He also created her warrior suit. So like, I appreciate that. But then at the same time, I feel like she never mourns Cinna. She brings him up, but then she kind of just like disregards it. Like, oh, it's whatever. I don't have to mourn the fact that, you know, Cinna died. Doing something for me. And like, this is along the lines of like every character that does die within these books. Like, we're gonna get to one character in particular that like really was the reason why I mentally blocked out the whole entire scene, because I just still can't believe that it was written this way. It's fine. It's fine. I still really can't stand Katniss. I really can't. She just really feels like she has mentally broke down and she's becoming her own mother. How her mom just broke down, didn't really want to talk to anybody and kind of pushed everybody away. And I get that. I really do, but like a majority of the scenes that are in this book are her talking about, I'm taking morphine, which morphine is a drug, and she's pretty much just saying like she would rather not think and feel anything and just go on with her day-to-day life rather than do all that. And I understand it's very post-traumatic and like, you know, like she's experiencing all of this, but at the same time feel like she doesn't acknowledge the fact that there are other people that are involved within the story. You know, you have Finnick, you have Cinna, you have Peeta, you have Gale, you have all these people that are willing to actually fight, and she doesn't want to fight. And I understand that she was forced into this position of being the Mockingjay and whatnot, but it just irks the crap out of me that she kind of just thinks all about herself. She doesn't think about those around her, and she's just kind of like, I don't want to do this, but then she doesn't think that, oh, well, like there are tons of people that are willing to fight for you with her, and they've suffered so much more. And like, this is like a huge topic throughout the whole entire series. Every time I read this is the second time I've read this book series. The first and this time, every time I read it, I have to remind myself that they are children going through this stuff. And this book has a way of like the way it's told just has a way of kind of like glancing over the fact that like you forget that there are people that are starving, and you forget that these people have lost people, you know. It's kind of like it's just like swept under the rug, and I'm a huge non-believer of that, but like this book has a way of making me forget that, okay, we're at a war, this is happening. And that was a whole other thing too. Like the whole entire time I just kept thinking Katniss wasn't really involved in the war. All she was, you know, the face of the rebellion, which I understand, like that's the premise. But at the same time, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, wars are just that simple. And you know, you get in and you get out kind of thing. So like, because by the end of the book, like the war is pretty much done, even though I don't know, like it just felt weird that like, okay, they started a war and it ended really quickly, and yes, a lot of people suffered, but like it didn't take very long to finish it. That's just one critique of mine. I really didn't like the love relationship between Katniss and Peeta and Gale. I'm on the side of Haymitch, where Haymitch literally always tells her, you don't deserve that boy. And in my head, I'm like, no, she doesn't deserve either of them. And here's a couple of reasons why. So Peeta, and it's brought up within the book, and I was really happy about this because I don't know, like, I guess like the movies really did kind of ruin the image of all the characters, because Peeta's a completely different person in the books, and I do want to do a review on the movies at some point too. When he does get brainwashed by the tracker jackers, that was a whole entire thing. I was really pissed that because there were moments, I forget where, it was moments where she's interacting with him and I understand that they're using him as a weapon towards her, the Capitol, but then she'll, like, there are moments when she's in her head and she's just saying in her head, I want to yell at him and all the horrible things and this and this and this and this. But then I'm like thinking to myself, like, poor Peeta, he was tortured and you want to yell at him? Because why? It's never really explained why she wants to yell at him. I understand that like she's going through a lot and she doesn't have anybody to talk to, but that's kind of her fault because she doesn't talk to anybody. Like she could talk to Haymitch, she could talk to Gale or Finnick. And for Peeta, I was just like, that whole entire interaction when they finally get Peeta back, and they only got Peeta back because of Katniss. That was the only reason, you know, like Haymitch said that they knew that she wouldn't be the Mockingjay if they didn't get Peeta back. And I understand that like Katniss is like, you should have got him in the first place and this and this and this, and even Coin wanted him too. And I agree with that. But like the interactions that her and Peeta have afterwards are kind of just like hilarious to me, because like the moments where she just says, maybe Peeta's finally seeing me for who I am, and I'm like, yeah, I totally agree with that. Because he sounds like okay, let's think of it this way. It's love is blind. Love is completely blind. You overlook so many things and you make excuses, or sometimes you don't even know if you really love this person, but you feel emotions towards them. And sometimes you really truly love them and then you just excuse everything that they do. So that's kind of like how Peeta was in the beginning, where he was completely in love with her. And then now he's kind of seeing where she is in life and how they're growing apart. But they do get back together later on. But there was a moment where he says, I must have been really, really in love with you because you're not that pretty and this and this and this. And like, yeah, that hits pretty low. But at the same time, like in my head, I thought, well, good for Peeta. He's finally, you know, becoming a man and is, you know, experienced with relationships now, that he could tell that like, hey, I don't have to agree with everything that Katniss does. And like, yeah, I love her, but that doesn't mean that like I agree with everything that she does. So he's not so much blinded anymore, because love is blind, and sometimes it takes some crazy stuff to actually like knock you out of it. And you can still have feelings for that person, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put them on a pedestal. I really like Peeta so much more in this book because I just felt like he was his own person. He wasn't just this like love-struck kid who just really, really loved Katniss. Like he still loved her at the end, but it felt more, I guess, more genuine towards the end of the novel, just because he would do things and say like, no, I don't want you to go, or just leave me behind. Like it was more so like genuine, I guess, the relationship. I don't know how to explain it. It just felt more like, I guess like, because like the first two books were more so of them putting on a show the whole entire time, whereas this time it's more so like, no, I care about you, I'm fine with being left behind and this and this and this, and it felt more genuine on his part. But you know, he's just a better character. He was already a good character to begin with. Now he's even like 10 times better because I feel like he's just his own person. He doesn't have to go along with Katniss all the time. It's talked about numerous times throughout this series that she feels like she can tell when what Haymitch is thinking or what they're gonna do next. He gives her an earpiece, and there was one moment which I really, really loved, and he's like, you better listen to my orders or else I'm gonna implant this earpiece into your head so that I can talk to you 24/7 and it'll never come out. And in my head, I thought to myself, you know what, I love the fact that he said that, but does he really want to talk to this teenage girl for the rest of her life in her head? But yeah, Haymitch is such a great character. I really do wish that there was more of him, surprisingly. There is some of him, but not a whole entire lot, and it's more so like him kind of just like stepping away and being like, I'm not your mentor anymore, even though at the end he pretty much becomes almost like her caretaker, but not entirely. But he's just like really understanding, and I loved and appreciated him. Gale. Let's talk about Gale. Gale, I know there are some people that don't like the fact that Gale was involved with the killing of Prim, and I didn't like that either. I know it's insinuated that he did help with it, and like we don't really know, but like we do know because we're seeing the story through Katniss's eyes, and we're thinking what she's thinking. But like he'll have like good insight every now and then, and I think one of my favorite lines of Gale's was when he literally told Katniss, oh, when I saw the way Finnick was staring at you, I thought I was gonna have to compete with him too. And in my head, I'm thinking to myself, she was what, like 16, right? Like 16 going into the quarter quell, maybe going on 17, and Finnick is like in his mid to early 20s. So that's just really weird that Gale would say something like that, because it's just like, no. Like, I understand that like Gale is pretty much like overly sexualized and overly dramatized to be like this Greek god of a man. Personally, I'm Team Finnick all the way. I love that scene where he mentions the sugar cube thing again, and I'm just like, you know what? I want a sugar cube now. Does anybody know where you could get sugar cubes from? But with Gale, they're pretty much him and Peeta are having a decent conversation towards the end, and they're just talking about like, you know, I wonder who she's gonna pick between the both of us. And I'm not a huge fan of like love triangles talking about that. I understand you could be friends with one another, but like just talking about the fact that like, so who do you think they're gonna pick between the two of us, huh? Like who do you think? Like, I feel like that's just a really weird and awkward conversation to have with somebody. Like, I did find it very insightful that the fact that like Gale pretty much just said, oh, that's easy, whichever one of us she can't survive without, you know what, that's actually really true, because knowing Katniss, she just really isn't an emotional type person. She's more of like survival type person, and the fact that she like agreed with it but then was also offended by it, I was kind of like, you know what, Katniss, I'm sorry, but like all these people, when they talk about their opinions towards you, it's pretty much correct. Just like with Peeta, where he told her like, you're not that pretty, and it didn't really look like you really want to kiss me back on the cameras and blah blah blah, and like she felt like she was being hurt by it. Like in the beginning of the first book, you're told that everybody in District 12 pretty much looks the same, and she even says how like plain Jane she looks. So I'm like, okay, this boy is telling you you don't look that pretty, but then at the same time I'm like, but you kind of know that, you acknowledge it. I understand when people like say that to you, it can be offensive. I don't know, it was just really bizarre. The whole President Coin thing, you could tell that they didn't like each other from the start. We're introduced to new world building again within this book because they live in District 13 now at this point. And they talk about how like, oh, they need to repopulate. You know what? I kind of actually wish that there was a younger character from District 13 who had just befriended Prim, and that would have been so great. I feel like because we don't get enough interactions with the other people in the district, it's more so just like, we're here and we're intruding and whatever. From the beginning, the fact that Katniss kind of like thinks that like, oh, Cohen doesn't hate me, and like she wouldn't want me dead, but like the first few things that she hears about Coin was that she had wished that they rescued Peeta and not her. So to me, that kind of just says, okay, you value other people's lives more than I do, and I don't even know you. So where Katniss, in the beginning, I understand why she's in such a defensive mode, but at the same time I was really annoyed that she was very pissed off at Haymitch, because I understand that he kept secrets from her and whatnot, but he also kept secrets from Peeta in the first games. But at the same time, I don't feel like that anger should have been directed towards him, because she talks about how like, oh, I want to kill him, like he's making me a part of these new games, and I'm like, you know, I don't think Haymitch wants to be in this situation either. He didn't really ask for any of this, and he's kind of just there. I mean, like, cut the dude some slack. He's a drunk for a reason. I felt really, really bad, and I'm just like, I don't like the fact that she's attacking him and hating him. The whole, like, video recording thing, the whole, like, oh, let's do promos and this and this and this. I thought it was super, super funny. And then the fact that everybody kind of just said that, like, when was a moment that really moved you? And there weren't too many moments that they talked about where she moved people, were moments where she was actually being selfless for once, or sort of to an extent, because like there weren't too many acts in which she was actually being selfless where, you know, people were moved by her. And it was so funny reading it. Yeah, like the only time that she moves people is when she's not thinking about herself and when she's actually being selfless for others, like when she saved her sister from the reaping, and when she kind of one line where they talk about like, oh yeah, the part where she drugged Peeta to go save him, and then Haymitch is just like, good, drugged Peeta. When I read that, I was just like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, you know what, this is exactly how you start your relationship off. You love each other, and then you drug them so you could save them. The Hunger Games, teaching about relationships. But at the same time, Haymitch was also the one that gave her the drugs, so we're not gonna point fingers here. It's been interesting reading these books as an adult, because now I'm kind of just like, man, like, what were we reading as young, not even teens, like tweens? This was another thing that I really hated. She wanted to run away from her problems constantly. Like, she kept talking about like, oh, let's run away to the woods. Even to the end of the book, she talks about, I wonder what it would have been like to just run away with Gale. So they're talking about like, oh, they're on this all-star team. And honest to God, I understand that like Plutarch made it seem like, no, we're just making this team because all of you guys were victors from the Quarter Quill and we just wanted you guys to be the front baseline, whatever. If I was on that team, I would be giving Katniss a horrible look, because I would just be staring at her and being like, this is your fault. This is your fault. Because the reason why we can't fight is because you're the Mockingjay. Why she got the idea to like, okay, we're on this team and I'm gonna be quiet because like I have to make it seem like I can follow orders, but I can't be too quiet and blah blah blah, which I thought was funny, like her whole little like snarky remark in her head, like, oh, the reason why Katniss is quiet is because Katniss is gonna take that hollow of yours and leave you all stranded. When I read that part, I was kind of just like, Katniss, you don't think your plans out very, very well. And at the same time, I'm like thinking to myself, like, okay, you're in a war. Visualize this. You're in a war and you're just gonna ditch all of the people who pretty much saved you constantly and who are doing this for you and for the rest of the world, and you're just gonna, and they're your friends, because they are your friends, because you don't have many friends, and you're just gonna leave them there stranded. And I'm pretty sure, I think she talked about how she wanted to take the map and stuff like that, and like just take the hollow and whatnot. And the reason why I'm saying stranded is because the hollow is supposed to, you know, kill all of them if they were to get captured, and knowing them, they would get captured and not be able to kill one another. So that whole entire thing, I was just like, Katniss, this is not a good idea. You're gonna you want to go kill President Snow so badly that you would rather sacrifice your own friends' lives and leave them to their own devices, and then just be like, fuck it to hell, I'm gonna kill him, and they're all gonna be saved. It's not like, oh, they're not gonna get captured, because Gale does get captured at some point. I think Peeta almost gets captured too. So it's not like, you know, it wouldn't have happened, because it would have happened, and then we would have been back at square one, and then they would have had more of your friends. Poor Finnick. Like, Finnick is just like, you know, doing his little knot thing, and I'm just like, I love you, you golden boy child, I love you so much. He's just like, you know, helping everybody cope and just being like, here, you know, this is what helps me to de-stress and whatnot, you know. Who's pretty much like, I want to go on a mission with you, Katniss, and whatnot, and she's like, no, go get your trident and whatever. And then he doesn't have any pants on, and he's just like, what, you don't think this is like a good outfit for me? And I can imagine clear as day him just being a hospital gown and just like posing. And like, poor Boggs is just kind of like, because you gotta remember that Boggs is a grown man, a grown military man, and he's looking at this 17-year-old and this like mid-20-year-old, and this mid-20-year-old is just like dancing in a nightgown. And then Boggs is just behind them, just like looking at these two, and I'm betting like he's probably just thinking like, our lives are in the hands of these tributes. And also, why are you the Mockingjay again? But I mean, he did have faith in Katniss, which I do appreciate, you know. He didn't have to be supportive of her. He could have just been like a really horrible jerk and been like almost like a peacekeeper kind of personality. The whole secrets thing, I to this day I still can't take that seriously. I understand where it's coming from, but at the same time I'm just like, I don't know, that whole entire part just felt really weird. I understand that like, oh, but like he's a great person, and like of course he can do so many promos because everybody loves him because, you know, he's the golden god of fishing. I have to mentally prepare myself for this. With Finnick and the wedding, I really do appreciate the fact that like everybody else is getting along with Peeta except for Katniss, whereas before Peeta just kind of always felt like the only person he ever really talked to was Katniss, and he never really had interactions with everybody else. Now it's more so the opposite way around, where like he's not really talking to her because he almost tried to kill her, but he gets along with everybody else, even Haymitch of all people, when he kind of didn't like Haymitch at one point. But I felt so bad because I'm like, oh, Peeta made the wedding cake, and I was just like, oh, I really appreciate that. But then at the same time, I'm like, this is really sad. The whole wedding thing was really, really great, but at the same time, I don't know, like it felt really weird that Katniss was just talking about like, oh, in District 12 we're the best dancers and this and this and this, and we might not have much, but we have dancing. I don't know, it just felt really bizarre. And she does talk about how like it's so great to have like this one moment in our lives to be really peaceful and quiet and stuff like that, and I'm like, I'm still waiting for that day in my own life. Oh, we have a celebration, there's a wedding, and we're happy. And it's weird because a lot of times within these books there's not a lot of like happiness going on, so I did appreciate that moment. Everything with Finnick and Annie, I was just like, oh, and when I was reading that I'm just like, they got married. I remember them getting married, and like I just got sad after that because I was just like, oh, and Finnick and Peeta did the cake, and I was just like, this is I'm like, I don't know if I can keep reading this, because it's funny because there are moments within like this book and the last book where it just felt like being back in high school, because like just the interactions, and it's a cafeteria scene where they're all just sitting down, right? So the fact that, you know, Annie and Finnick, they're over here in love, and I'm just like, that's what real love is. I'm like, I want to know more. And then Peeta just like randomly comes over, and he's just like, hey Finnick, you better treat her right, otherwise I'm gonna take her away. And I'm just like thinking to myself like, Peeta, she is a grown woman. And the fact that she just kind of like laughed like weird, I'm just like, just to hear him talk about like somebody else feels like he has more of a character. But the funny part wasn't the fact that like he said that in front of all of them. The funny part was after he said it, right, and everybody's just staring at him like, that's not something you would normally say because you're in love with Katniss, but we all know that you are going through some stuff right now. But the funny part was that you hear all of this like discussion of like how like all these people are here, but Katniss doesn't once mention that Gale is like sitting right next to her the whole entire time. And like, so afterwards then she's like, I lift up my tray and Gale follows with me. So like that part was just like, oh my god, this is just too funny. They're already in an awkward conversation as is, but then like Gale is just there kind of just like not saying anything, not defending anybody either. and just kind of just like whatever, like, oh, like Peeta like lashed out and did this and did that. There weren't that many moments where I felt like he was lashing out. I think there was only like 2. I see more of this. I want to see like how it affects him, like how badly is he being affected by all of this. The fighting sequences within each scene, I wasn't fully immersed in every single one of them. Like the one with the hospital, I kind of just felt like this is really weird. Like, why is Katniss, a 17-year-old, able to take down a full entire plane with just arrows? Like, I understand that they're explosives, but at the same time, like, it just bothers me that she's so cocky. And she's just like, I can shoot anything and destroy it. The whole other scene with the whole nut, cracking the nut, bizarre. There were moments where I just didn't like it. Like, the whole entire time where she's, like, listening to Gale about the plan, and he's talking about how, like, I would rather kill thousands of innocent people than not, you know, get the bad guys and whatever. And it goes with that old saying, like, kill the few to save the many type of mentality. And this was happening in District 2, which a lot of people don't like them because of the fact that, like, they were close with the Capitol. But it's not the fact that, like, Gale says those things, because I understand he is kind of not sadistic, maybe sadistic. It bothered me that Katniss had to think twice about the plan, because her first initial reaction was like, I completely agree with him full-heartedly on this. But she steps back and then she's like, but wait, I know nobody's gonna agree with him other than me. So because I'm the Mockingjay, I have to disagree with him, and I have to side with these people that I don't really think about, and I agree with him, but I can't because of the people. And I understand that, like, I appreciate the fact that she's caring about everybody else, but at the same time, it just bothered me that her first initial reaction was like, I'm with you. And then she had to take a step back and think, wait, that's actually not right. But at the same time, I'm like, Katniss, you didn't think that first. Because it later on shows, later on, when she pretty much, and that's the part that really pisses me off, where they're talking about how, oh, like, with, you know, everything being said and done, you know, let's do another Hunger Games to show the world that we're ending all of this. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, I'm with Peeta. Why the heck would you do this? Like, you're ending the Hunger Games and the civil unrest and all of this stuff just so that you could end it with the Hunger Games? Like, I don't understand that. And then it builds up to this thing where you think that Katniss is gonna say no, and how she's like, this is so wrong, and this is so this, and this is so that. But then she says, I'm for it. I agree. And I'm just like, what? Like, you built it up to the point where you're just like, oh, I agree with everybody else, but I'm gonna agree with President Coin. I think it probably has to do with the fact that, like, because, like, in the beginning they talk about how, like, oh, I think Boggs tells her, like, if you don't agree with President Coin and you don't elect her as the next president, then you're just as good as dead. So I think that probably is the connection there, where, like, yeah, if she doesn't agree with it, then she's gonna die and whatever. But at the same time, it just, like, really bothered me that, like, it's never brought up again, and she never says, like, oh yeah, like, I didn't mean to say that, I was just doing this, and blah blah blah. And that's a really, really far stretch for me to be making that connection, because it just really bothered me, because I'm like, why would you agree with that? And I'm like, you risked your life to save your sister from these games, and now you're kind of just like, yeah, let them all burn. Let's talk about Joanna. Not a lot of people talk about Joanna. Joanna is, like, one of my favorite characters. I find it so funny that, like, she hits on Gale, and Gale is kind of like, I'm terrified of her. And I'm like, that's saying a lot coming from Gale. Amazing. I love her so much. She's a real fighter. The fact that, like, she literally told Katniss, like, you have to kill him. It has to be you. I love her as a character so much. She's just a real huge fighter compared to Katniss, where Katniss is kind of like, I'm just gonna shut down, I don't really care anymore. But Joanna is kind of like, no, I want to fight with you, let's do this, whatever, even though she doesn't get to fight in the long run. And I do feel sad about that, because I'm like, we don't really get to hear more about Joanna afterwards anymore. It's kind of just like she has this one couple of interactions with Katniss and then it's kind of over. So they end up living together because Joanna is mentally unstable and she can't be on her own, because she's also actually taking the morphine from Katniss's IV and whatnot and all that stuff. The whole other scene with the nut where she talks about, like, I see myself die and I should have died right there and then. And in the back of my mind I was just like, yeah, you probably should have. A lot of people thought if she died, she could just be a monarch, you know, and people would have been inspired to fight more. President Coin saw it that way too. So, President Coin, she, I don't see a lot of people, I feel like they hate her. I don't hate her, but I also don't really know her all that much. So I don't, like, she's made out to be this government official, and it's kind of like, oh, like all these government officials, you can't trust them. So it's kind of more of like a thing where like, I can take her or leave her. I don't have an opinion about her. I don't like her, but I don't hate her, but I don't love her. She's just kind of there. I feel like Plutarch is just like a walking infomercial. The movies don't really truly do him justice. He seems like a normal person in the movies. He is very, very, very like camera, lights, glam, whatever. And he just has a really big personality. Plutarch, like, you don't know what's going on here, and you're kind of just there. Having the 3 stylists come back was really, really sad and disheartening. I was just like, man, that's really messed up. Like, they don't ever really talk about it anymore after that, because I have a huge feeling that a lot of those people were tortured within 13. It's only mentioned about those 3, but there's probably a huge thing that a lot of people were going through that. Joanna is a true fighter, and she doesn't get enough credit. But like, yes, she was tortured, and that was really messed up. But the fact that like there was a moment, and I didn't remember this when I first read it the first time, and I was like, you know what? That's really courageous of her to do. The fact that like it was raining outside, and she's afraid of the rain now because that was a torture device they used on her. She pretty much just like forced through it and was kind of like, I'm gonna do this, let's go and you know, do this. And Katniss kind of was just like, I don't know, she was in her own little world, and she didn't really like realize. I feel like this is a moment where she doesn't realize the severity and the effect of the torture that was being done on all these people, and how the war and all these events have affected other people in such a horrible, horrible way. And yes, she was affected too, but like she kind of just like internalizes everything and doesn't really like acknowledge that, like, you know, other people are going through this as well. It's not just you. The fact that like Katniss kind of just gives her like this like bag of pine cones, I'm like, I appreciate the thought, but you also just gave her a bag of pine cones. This is what gets me riled up, because this leads into talking about Prim and Katniss's family in general. And I think I talked about this in the second book, how it really bothers me that this is something that is kind of a recurrence within the story. This is kind of like a foreshadowing thing. Had I actually like paid attention to this when I first read this book, I probably would have thought, you know what, something's gonna happen to Katniss's family. In the second and the third book, she doesn't really acknowledge her family all that much as she should be. Like, she'll bring up some things here and there, and like there are mentions like the hanging tree, the song. I hate the fact that though that it was overly explained, because I'm like, okay, I understand the song. I don't need an explanation. And by the end of the explanation, I was kind of just like, I'm more confused than I was before. But it's a good song, and I do appreciate the mentioning of her father and whatnot. But throughout the second and this book, she doesn't really acknowledge her family all that much anymore, which is really bothersome. And this is why. This series started off with the meaning of family and sacrifice and all of that, because the first few chapters are of Katniss talking about her mom and her sister and her dad, and how she would do anything for her sister, her little duck, and all of that. And it's mentioned a few times about how, like, you know, she's a little duck, and like she's not a little duck anymore, and she's getting older, and she's 14. And this story, the series starts with how Katniss sacrifices herself for Prim. She volunteers to save Prim, right? And it's kind of, it gives you off this idea that this is going to be a story about how Katniss is selfless and she cares about her family, and that's all she cares about. She just wants survival. She asks Gale to take care of them in this on Catching Fire. I felt like the idea of her family just like went out the window. It was kind of like, I don't care. I just want Peeta alive. Who cares about my sister? Who cares if I live? Whatnot, you know? Because when you really think about it, if Katniss did die in the second book, her family would be back in the seam. Because they don't inherit any of what she has. They pretty much just go back. And she talks about that. Bother me. I understand that she feels like she owes Peeta and she loves him. But it bothered me that in the second book, where she kind of just throws at her family and she's kind of just like, oh, whatever, you know, like, I don't really care. Even though the whole reason why I got into this mess was because I cared for my sister, right? So stay with me. because this has to do with later on in the ending. So for me, it's prevalent in the third book that like Katniss doesn't really care about her family, even if it's unintentional and she's kind of just like, I have other problems to deal with and I would rather be intoxicated constantly than think about my family. If I had actually paid attention to this line that Joanna had said, I probably would have figured out that something would have happened to Prim later on. Because this is such a foreshadowing thing that she says. This is a true testament to Katniss's character, that she's not really personally selfless. She doesn't think about others until the second forethought comes over. You know, she'll have an initial reaction and then the actual reasoning, like the legitimate good reasoning, will happen afterwards. Joanna tells her, she's like, kill President Snow for me. You have to kill him. And she's like, I'll try. And Joanna's like, no, you have to. Swear to me that you will kill him. When I was reading this, I instantly thought, okay, Katniss, just swear on your family's life because, you know, they're your family, you care about them, there's so much there for you, you know? No, her first thing she says is like, I swear on my life. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, excuse me? Like, I've read so many of your internal thoughts. You don't care about yourself half the time. You literally would try to like kill yourself than have other people die over you. And then instantly Joanna is just like, no, you idiot, swear on your family. Like, that would have been the logical thing to do, you know, like, I volunteer as tribute. Even Joanna sees it. Everybody sees it. Everybody sees Katniss for who she is. And like, even Prim later on tells her, like, Katniss, you hold more power than you think you do. And I'm like, Prim, who's a 14-year-old, can figure it out. But Katniss cannot, for some weird reason. It's like a mental block. She has a mental block in front of herself. Here was strike number 2, where I realized Katniss don't care about her family. So there's the moment where Peeta warns District 13 that they're gonna get bombed. And I feel so bad for Peeta because I feel like a lot of her reactions before he got, you know, tortured, all of her reactions to him whenever she would see him again, she would always think, Peeta's against me, I need to kill him. She did that in the first Hunger Games. She did that in the second one because she was like, oh my god, he's with Finnick, why would he be with Finnick? And now that he's like on TV, she's like, oh my god, why is he doing this? Why is he saying that? And I'm like, probably because he doesn't want a war to break out and he doesn't want thousands of people to die. So I don't understand why you're mad at him for saying the things that he's saying, because he's probably also being tortured. So she didn't think that, and she's kind of just like, I hate him. I hate him every time. Every time I see him, I hate him. What she does is that when they're told that they're gonna have a bombing, right? She goes down to the bunker. They're telling them, you know, the doors are gonna be closed. And it isn't until like the last few seconds that she then realizes, oh shit, I have a family. Why aren't they down here yet? And like, she even talks about how, oh, I didn't really think about it. I didn't think to go check up on them. But like, no, it's Gale who goes and gets them. And then Katniss is like, of course Prim will go back for the cat, which the cat, every time the cat comes in, I have emotional attachments to the cat. I love the cat, okay? I love every single character first before Katniss. I like the cat more than Katniss. Let's put it in those terms. I appreciated all the moments with Finnick because there were moments where like, yeah, they go kind of hunting together, and I appreciated that because I'm like, you know what, every scene with Finnick is an amazing scene. All of the scenes are beautiful. I love them. When Peeta legitimately tells her like, do you love me or did you feel anything? And she's kind of just like, I don't know. Like, all her response is, oh, that's what everybody says that we're in love. And he's like, that's not an answer. And I'm like, that's not, yeah, that isn't an answer. And like, she still doesn't answer him. Now let's get into the topic of the deaths in this book. It's so messed up that, you know, I don't think anybody ever tells Peeta that his family died until probably like, you know, years later. That's really messed up. We're gonna talk about Finnick's death. And particularly with Finnick's death, when I first read this book, I mentally blocked out his death, and I legitimately created a fake death for him, and I thought that he was crushed by a boulder. Because to me, in my head, that was more merciful than what actually happened to him. Because he pretty much got killed the same way Cato got killed, only 10 times worse. Bothers me so much because Katniss talks about how like they're after us and I smell roses, and like Gale is just saying don't look back, don't look back. And I understand like Gale wants her alive and whatnot. Gale should have sacrificed himself. It should have been Gale. I'm gonna say that. It should have been Gale. It shouldn't have been Finnick. Finnick shouldn't have died. He just got married. He also had a kid. I'm just really sad. And then the other part too is that afterwards she's like, I can't grieve over him. I can't think about that right now. And in the back of my mind I'm like, Katniss, you never grieve over anyone. You never do. You never grieve over anybody in this book. The only person I feel like she actually legitimately grieved, and it's not, she didn't really grieve with Prim. Yes, she did have a good cry, but she didn't really grieve, because I feel like the only person that she truly grieved with was Rue, because she actually gave her pretty much like a memorial and a burial, and she was thinking about her the whole entire time. She literally stopped everything while she was in a dire situation of almost dying by other people. That was the only time I feel like she ever grieved over any character within this novel. She didn't really grieve over Cinna. She didn't really grieve over Finnick. And she kind of grieved with Prim, but not completely. And it wasn't her doing to grieve. It was because of something else. And so with Finnick, I was just so mad because I'm like, you're doing the same thing you did with Cinna. You're not thinking about him. You pretty much just like don't acknowledge the fact that he died. Another thing too, another character that died that she didn't actually grieve over was Boggs. Boggs was such a great character. I loved him. The fact that like he just pretty much died in front of her. She wasn't really paying attention to anything, and like I understand it's a dire situation, but she never brings up the fact that like I feel so bad for Boggs. What if he had a family, this and this and this? Because I felt like Boggs was the fatherly figure that she needed in her life. I could see Katniss's mom and Boggs being a thing. He was a new character and you don't get too attached to him, but at the same time it was just like he did not deserve to die. And there were a lot of characters that did not deserve to die. What other characters? Yeah, Finnick did not deserve to die, and I'm gonna say it. Gale should have died. You should have died. I mean, he leaves at the end of the book anyway. He leaves because Katniss is just doesn't talk to him again because she's like, oh, well, he's in another district and he's probably with somebody else, so who cares? It's kind of like she's not mad at him, but she also like doesn't care to talk to him again. But at the same time, she's kind of just like, I'm not gonna put forth the effort because of the circumstances. Like, he's just in another world. Like, he's moved on. Yeah, the whole thing with Prim. I hated it too. I was in denial. And here's the thing. I wasn't attached to Prim. I really wasn't. Like I said, like, Katniss doesn't bring up her family all that much, and there's not a lot of moments with her family where she actually is talking to Prim. You know, and she even says, like, oh my god, she's growing up so fast and I'm not really there for her anymore. So it's kind of like, I am not sad that Prim died. I'm just sad that, like, because the story started with her and it was the reason the story was created. Because if it weren't for Prim being chosen, none of it would have happened. And she dies for everybody else to start a new life. So it's kind of like she began the war and she ended the war. Yeah, Katniss wasn't the Mockingjay. Prim was. I'm like, Prim was the duck. She was the Mockingjay. She was just the driving force. She was the reason for the story. She was the plot reason, you know, she was everything. But like, you don't really know too much about her, and you don't totally like pay attention to a lot about her. You know she's there and she's an important thing, but it's just really is disheartening that she dies. And when I first read this, I remember reading it and I finished the ending of it when I was like 15, maybe going on 16, and I read this part and I was all alone and I was crying. And no, I wasn't crying. I because like every book character that dies, I just think they're not dead. I'm in denial. They're not dead. So, because like even when it's like written about how Katniss sees the fact that like there are the parachutes and why is Prim here and this and this and this, and a lot of it didn't add up as to why they would kill their own people. And Katniss does talk about like, oh well, like I think the reason why she did it because she knew that I would go crazy and this and this and this, why Coin did that. It like the whole sequence of how like Katniss is like, I'm on fire and this is what happens, and she does get mutilated and whatnot. Both her and Peeta get mutilated at one degree or another. But the whole thing, just when I read it the first time, I felt like it wasn't real, because I felt like it was written as like a dream sequence, because she talks about like my hand is on fire and And then Prim is there and then she's gone. And then she goes into a dream hallucination. So like the whole entire time I'm just thinking like, no, it's not real. It's not real. She's not dead. She's alive. She's alive, and she's gonna like pop her little head out and she's gonna have her freaking cat with her. So for a good couple of chapters when I first read this book, it wasn't until later on when Katniss goes back home and she sees the cat that I officially cried. I was all alone and I cried and I cried, and I was like, I'm not crying because of Prim. I'm crying because the cat made me cry. And that is why I love Buttercup so much more. I loved that cat, and that cat made me cry. That was the first time I cried in this whole entire series when I first read this book. And even to this day when I reread that part, I was so sad because I'm like, this just reminds me of my own tragedy, because when I went through a traumatic instance, the only thing that I had to make me feel better, or like the only thing that was there at the time to comfort me, was my own cat and dog. So reading that again just really brought back emotions, and I was just like, because the fact that she's just like, she's not here, you stupid cat, why are you still here? The fact that like the cat doesn't like her, you know, and the cat's just like, I know she's not here anymore, but I'm gonna stay with you because you're the only thing that's close to her. To this day is the only part that still gets me emotional. Even when I went to go see it in theaters, when I saw that cat, I was just like, okay, I know everything that happened, and now this poor cat is crying, and I'm just like, it was just like the breaking point for me. I'm like, no, not Buttercup too. Was it Madge, the girl who pretty much gave her the pin, and she talks about how like the girl who gave me the pin and who made me who I am, and I'm like, yeah, she died too, and you don't really talk about her. You're kind of just like, yeah, I remember her, but we're not gonna mourn her. I wish there was more Effie. Effie wasn't really mentioned all that much, and even Katniss kind of almost thinks like maybe she's dead, and I'm kind of just like, okay, we're gonna write her off too. And then she comes back and then she's like pretty much the same as ever, and I'm like, you know what, Effie, so much probably has happened to you and you probably need to go see a therapist. Bad for Effie. I'm like, I miss Effie and I loved her, and she just shows up and she's kind of just like, I'm fine, let's go get you ready to kill President Snow. It's kind of obvious that she wasn't gonna kill the president. What he told her at the end of like, oh, it wasn't our ships that killed your sister, it wasn't our ships that would do that to children, but the evidence points that he probably would because he has killed children, but he says that he wouldn't do it to be wasteful, even though that was wasteful. The Hunger Games were wasteful. I dislike the character President Snow, but I dislike to hate him. You know what? President Snow did not deserve to die being trampled on and just dying from natural causes. Because I feel like that was just an easy way out for him. Like, he already kind of knew he was gonna die. I forgot that Gracie Say takes care of Katniss a majority of the time afterwards. Yeah, and I think it's just like really sad that like her mom doesn't even come back to visit her. Her mom kind of just does her own thing. Which, I mean, I appreciate, but then at the same time, I'm just like, wow, that's pretty messed up. And then finally, Katniss sings a lot more, and I'm like, aw, that reminds me of, like, how you talk about how your dad sang a lot. And I was like, finally, she's changing and opening up, and she's not, like, keeping her voice from the rest of the world. It's, like, one of my huge gripes with the whole entire book was the ending. And I wish the movie had stuck with the ending where we could have had internal dialogue of Katniss in the movie just saying what she says in the epilogue, because when I read that epilogue, I was just like, you know what? I wish this wasn't here because maybe I could have redeemed Katniss in my eyes, but nope, this did not redeem her. The whole mentioning with like Finnick's kid, these people did not deserve to die for you to complain. And then she just talks about how like, I really didn't want to have kids, and like PETA made me do it, where she just says, my kids play on a burial ground. I'm gonna have to tell them one day that they played on a burial ground, and that, you know, things were horrible and I went through this shit, and you know, but I like to think of all the good things that people do in their lifetime. And I'm like, if I were to think that way, I would just be like, thousands of wars have happened in the US and we're all walking on a burial ground. I have to remind myself that like there are good people, and I'm like thinking to myself like, yeah, all the people that died for you. Gale. Gale kind of doesn't have like a legitimate reason as to why he loves her. Because there's a moment where he tells her, he's like, oh, I kind of just knew that I had feelings for you because you were being hit on by another guy and I felt jealous. So that's the reason why I love you. Good moments where she's like, where she says like, oh, like if we burn, you burn with us, like those little things, the hanging tree, which I appreciated. I really enjoyed this, and I'm really happy that I actually still like this book, considering that I'm a young adult now. So case checkpoint, young adult. But overall, I probably would give it a 3.5 stars. Great book. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, or anything like that, please feel free to leave anything down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see all you guys in the next video. Bye.